again, thank you for accepting this invitation. And how is actually the situation in Texas about the pandemic context that we are living now? Because in Italy, we are completely locked up in our houses. And actually, I don't know how is the situation going all across America.
Well, I mean, our president, he has issued like some guidelines, but he's kind of left open to each state, the governor of each state, to make decisions. We are in, our local community is in a shelter in place, and most of the major cities in Texas, like Austin, Houston, Dallas, but not everywhere is. And there's lots of debates going on about what is considered essential services, besides a hospital and besides a pharmacy and food, what kind of shops, what kind of businesses are essential, is a church essential? Should they close or not? So, and because, I think there's more autonomy, it creates a lot more challenges, because you can't just say, like in Italy, you say, everyone stays in this place and, you have to listen, so.
Yes.
They think that we're going to see a lot more. They say a spike in cases in the last 2 months, but also because 2 weeks, because we've been really slow to get testing done.
Yes, I see. We have had also the very same issues in debating what is necessary and what is not, and also we have had the very same issues about churches, for example. So it's interesting for us to understand whether and to which extent church and practicing faith or religion is considered by the state, by the local government as essential or not. Okay, actually, I will start with the questions, because I don't want to take too much time of yours. So. You are definitely one of the leading figures in this field, digital religion. And in 2010, and other scholars at the Center of Digital Humanities Research launched a network called Network for New Media, Religion, and Digital Culture Studies. So, can you tell us more about it and about the actual research that you conduct in this framework?
So the reason I started the network was I had been starting my research circa about 1995, and I was getting a lot of emails from all around the world of people, graduate students, journalists interested in this area of digital religion, but not knowing where to go for resources. And so it has kind of a twofold purpose. One is to kind of be a repository for key scholarship, who the key scholars are, like a who's who database, as well as kind of keep up on the kind of conferences, news reports, and issues related to how people are using religion for digital purposes, and looking at all religions, or at least the major world religions, as well as new religious movements. So that was one aim. And the second was to also, for me, create a space for my students to publish some of their research and just kind of organize some of the areas that we were looking in. So starting, we did some research on blogs. I worked with student researchers to look at how blogs were becoming new spaces where people were both becoming new authorities online, or new gatekeepers of knowledge, as well as how religious leaders were then learning about blogs and the internet and using that to kind of reassert their authority. Since then, we've done studies on how kind of religious apps have emerged, and how do you kind of approach and study them, and what are the trends, especially how people are using apps for like prayer, and especially sacred texts. How are they presented, and how are they being designed? And then a more recent study been looking at how internet memes communicate different messages about religions, whether it's a specific religious tradition or just how religion is seen in the public sphere. And so this has involved kind of both research studies. We have online databases. Some are open to public and some are not at this point. but trying to kind of create places where researchers can go and kind of look at and have discussions on. And we've tried to do some other creative things like online conferences, blogs where people kind of give reports of their research or we interview them. So again, it's supposed to be a hub for basically anyone who's doing or wants to learn about digital religion.
Okay, so from the one side, it's like a repository, an archive, a map of the field of study. From the other, it's a starting point for research, and it's like a hub. All these scholars, okay. And you also do quantitative research with quantitative data.
Most of my research is qualitative, but I have done some quantitative research related to content analysis. So content analysis, both of kind of, especially on blogs, looking at kind of how people, the kind of sources of authority that they refer to, who are the people that, who or what is considered authoritative by religious groups online, and looking at that kind of the discourses of official or recognized offline religious leaders and online religious leaders. As well as I'm currently doing a big research study and done a couple projects on visual content analysis, looking at kind of memes and digital content about what kind of messages about religion they communicate.
Okay, this is interesting to me as a semiotician because semiotics is a qualitative discipline, but we are starting to study social media and the digital environment in general, also from a quantitative point of view. So I can see a parallel between these two fields of study. It's interesting for us. Actually, talking about digitalization in general, how digital practices may change or may not change our ideas of self and personhood, in your opinion?
Well, I think we're kind of at a really interesting moment over about in the last 2 to 4 years, because when I came online in the 90s, it was really kind of, we talk about the terms of digital immigrants and digital natives. All of us were immigrants at that time. And so, we really kind of looked at how the internet was kind of this new space, but that a lot of how it was conditioned or defined or how people performed, say, their identity online was influenced by kind of their offline. So like, okay, I'm trying to, how can I translate or transmit, kind of how I define myself and how I might talk in a religious community in online spaces? How does that influence how I see religious texts, what it means to be a religious community? Now we're seeing that, the millennials, but especially some people are calling Generation Z, my students now, they don't remember a world before the internet. And so they have a very different, interesting, because we used to talk about how the internet was a place where people construct and perform their identity. So the internet gives us resources in which we can kind of choose, okay, I'm going to add this tag onto my Twitter stream and I'm going to friend these people. And that says a lot about how the kind of religious identity I present. So this idea of kind of constructing or pushing forth. And then another metaphor was used is the idea of performance. Performance, about kind of, how we can use the internet space to kind of act out those things that we're trying to define ourselves by. But that's, so people are still kind of constructing, putting together, and then acting out this. But the front stage and the back stage, as as we say, is kind of changed a lot because of that. That where we used to think of those as separate spaces, it's really hard to differentiate now. And I think, whereas I, as an immigrant, would have thought about these are two consciously different spaces that I'm trying to integrate, people now come with the assumption that they're already blurred, convergent space. And so it's a different kind of like style of how they kind of act out their authority. And sometimes young people are living out their authority online, and then they have to actually take it offline versus the other way around.
Yes, actually, we are facing a kind of blurring of the frontiers between the online and the offline. For example, there is this Italian philosopher who works at the Oxford Internet Institute, Luciano Floridi, who says that we can no more make this distinction between online and offline because we live on life. And I think it's a good way of, a good perspective to study all this phenomena. And a great distinction actually that has been established by religion studies is between religion online religion, so between the remediation done by the internet on the one side, and from the other side, religious practices specific to the internet. Can you say to our viewers something about this distinction, if it's still relevant?
Well, yeah, Christopher Holland was the one who originally came up with this distinction, and he was doing it while he was doing his PhD, and he was looking at kind of, how are religious groups going online, the religion online, and to what extent are people kind of using the internet to experiment and modify, re-envision spirituality. While he treated them as equal categories, he later went on, it's in the 2000s up until 2010 said, really what we're seeing mostly is religion online. But as you kind of said, religion online has become a space that's not just one or the other. It's this embedded, intertwined space. I think what's interesting now is, like, in the last 5 years, people are kind of returning to this kind of category of online religion. Back in the 90s and 2000s, we had these experiences with techno-paganism, of people like trying to do neo-pagan rituals online. There's been a lot of discourse, especially coming out of Silicon Valley, of how the internet itself might be a religious space, and how could we envision that, and how could that, especially with the Wisdom 2.0 mindfulness movement, how could internet be kind of a way to kind of work that out? But I think, we're seeing, especially with things, things are becoming homegrown online, and that's where the reality they're born in, and before they're translated offline. And I think that we're beginning to see a lot more experience of that. And so I think we're going to see a surge more in online religion, which for the first kind of 2 decades of kind of the internet, we're really kind of just these neat examples, but definitely not the mainstream.
Thanks. Talking about digital religion as a field of study, according to your experience, which is the main bias, the main problem, the main issues that a scholar studying religion in the digital ecology has to face within the field? For example, there are a lot of scholars, or also the media. We can see that this category of fake religion is used a lot in a kind of contraposition between online and offline. So it's difficult to study online religion and digital religion in general, actually, and be acknowledged within religious studies in general.
Well, I think there's two things. One thing is, there's this phrase, there's nothing new under the sun. And so a lot of what we see in digital religion is a replication of the same questions and challenges scholars who've studied religion and technology, religion and science, religion and media faced for decades. So there's a media historian, John Furey, who wrote an article looking at kind of religious groups' approach to media, and this is in the electronic era, the broadcast area. And he said religious communities take one of three responses. Either they are kind of, they say, wow, religion is a conduit, it's a space that I can use, I put content in, it'll do what I want it to do, and I can control how it is used, and it can be positive for religious groups for spreading their word. On the opposite side is, religion is this social, cultural institution, and so it has its own values, or is religion as kind of a technological determinist viewpoint, where religion has its own logic and values built into it. And so if I use the technology, it's going to force me to go in certain directions that may actually be antithetical to my religious community. Then there's the middle of the road approach saying, no, actually, technology is not just an artifact or a thing. It involves people creating it, people using it, and people can actually adapt it in ways to their moral codes. That doesn't mean they just have to accept or reject, but they can actually modify it. And he lays out this response, and I use it a lot in my work because, whether it was the, days of email and news groups to Second Life to, apps to now we're seeing things like TikTok and, WhatsApp, all these kind of new platforms. There's the same, every time a new technology pops up, religious groups and religious scholars had these three responses. It's great, but I have control of it. It's awful because I don't have control of it. Or B, I have control and I don't have control of it. So that, I would say, is half of my answer to your question. The second issue would be, I think, especially religious studies scholars, talking about is online fake or not. There's a lot of people use the term virtual religion. I find that a problematic term because it emerged from the virtual reality and virtual studies, and so most people assume there's this kind of legacy in the semiotics and language of it that virtual means something false or something incomplete. And so if we use that term, then it kind of gets a sense of competition or real and not real. And so that's why I use the term digital. But what I think what you see is that, and most scholars in religion who've been studying this for a while, that we see three different kind of manifestations in religion online. One is just what I call official religions or religious traditions and communities. They're going online and they're negotiating the digital age. But we also see this trend toward live religion, where people, they may say, hey, I'm Buddhist, I'm Jewish, I'm Christian, but they feel the internet gives them a lot more freedom and control over who they listen to, how they engage, and even what kind of package they put together of the sources they read, the people they listen to, and the practices they do. And so this kind of, I think scholars are beginning to say that, let's pay attention to what people do, even if they give themselves an official religion label. And I think so that's one thing. And I think the third thing is, this fake religion debate also touches on this concept of implicit religion, or some people call it, well, I can't remember the term now, but the idea that a religion is that there's things in secular life or mainstream culture that have replaced for many people religion. And especially in Europe, there's this kind of trend toward, it used to be, there's a religious belief, but they chose not to belong to the community. And now people choose not to even believe. But they found other places, whether it's politics, whether it's fandom of a certain area, to replace that kind of sense of meaning, community, and identity. And so I think, like some of these say, like the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. Well, that's a fake religion. Yeah, but it's also an implicit religion. They've created this kind of a little bit mockery of this space, but they kind of give a sense of, hey, I have an identity. I'm hold to a few loose principles. Similar with copyism, the idea that information wants to be free, and the kind of Creative Commons discourse. Let's kind of put our that as a focus, and buying into that ideology gives me an identity, a space that people look at, and a space to kind of find meaning. And so I think we're finding these new expressions of meaning that are fake because they don't match the traditional definition, but they still have a family resemblance of religion.
Yes. I also agree that this implicit dimension of religion is important because, like every cultural phenomenon, it's really stratified. So we have different degrees of institutionalization, for example, and the idea that we can we spread actually our identity through different medias and to different fields of meaning, and religion is one of that. So it's okay to be studied in contexts that translate with their specificities, and so religion, just like many other dimensions of identity, which is a really interesting issue that you already referenced, obviously, that you already addressed. Can you talk about the relationship between these identity needs that people express through religion, for example, and the idea which is really important, and which is really important in your studies? For example, it was one of the main sections in one of your most important handbooks about digital religion, which is rituality. Which relationship can we find? Can we find between the ritual and the identity as regards digital religion practices?
Well, I think, if we look at just religion as a term, Giddens, he says that, religion has kind of three basic aspects. It has a certain sense of the divine or transcendence in the world today. That sets up a set of kind of specific beliefs about the world and what gives us meaning, and then a set of rituals. And so, I think, ritual and becomes an important place, because it's hard for us often to say, what is that religion, especially if it's a new manifestation or people are living it out in a new way. It's hard to identify the actual belief or theology or rhetoric behind it, but we can really clearly see what people do. And so this is what I do with my students all the time. I said, what are people doing online? Okay, what seems to be, why are they doing it, and what's the motivation? So we can use ritual as a way to kind of create boundaries and define kind of different expressions of digital religion, as well as a way to kind of, it's what they do is the fascinating point, and then it becomes then a kind of a, kind of grounded approach to then work backwards to say, well, what does that represent? What is the belief? And then, so what is the basis? And then the end point then of that religious expression, whether it's a, again, lived religion or implicit religion.
So we can say that the ritual in general is a kind of magical circle within which we can find or not some traits belonging to traditional religions, but that in general is a kind of border of boundary we can find as an identification, individuation of what we can define today as a religious practice. So we have to formalize a ritual in order to read the features, the traits of religiousness in a kind of online practice. It is really anthropological and semiotic.
Anthropological, and ethnographic. And I think this is very new for a new way of thinking for religious studies scholars in some respects, and even media scholars. But it's been the bread and butter of many other sociology and anthropology for decades.
Yes. Also because the great traditional religions of the book, the religions of the book, are really linked to a kind of practice which is not generally conceived as such. Not reading the book is not considered as a peculiar, specific practice. Instead, we know that it's a practice by all means and in all its respects. So, as you addressed just a few minutes ago, you have studied internet memes and religious ones, which is something that is really interesting to me because I studied a bit internet memes and also hagiographic memes. Can you recognize some patterns in how these memes work, besides being ascribable? Besides the fact that this meme is pertinent to the Jews, is pertinent to the Catholics, there is a kind of mimetic religion or religious mimeticity that you can identify, something like that.
Yeah. Well, for the last 7 years, I've been studying kind of memes and religion with my students in different kind of research studies. And there's two different kinds of memes. There's religious memes, and so these are memes that are usually created by religious insiders as a way to kind of as inside jokes to communicate, our identity and what our beliefs are, or even sometimes as PR elements, to say, hey, this is what people think we are, but this is what we really are. And so I began my research looking at kind of memes and how people were using them within religious context. I mean, I've moved in the last few years now to looking at memes about religion, which these are kind of become tools of how people, sometimes inside, but oftentimes either former religious people or people who are definitely outside of religious community, and how they use memes to talk about or describe religion in the popular sense. So I mean, memes. The challenge is there are obviously videos and different and GIFs and stuff like that. I'm most interested in kind of images. So you have one image and a little bit of text. So they're meant to be succinct. They're meant to be kind of make broad generalizations that a large group can identify with, so they can go viral. And so when it comes to religion, that means that they're as a default, they're going to be based on stereotypes, because the stereotypes are the assumptions about how people what religion looks like or how people act or why they do that are most publicly understandable to the broadest audience. And so, I'm doing a lot of unpacking about, what happens when these memes not only are telling these broad stereotypes, but they turn to be very mean, hostile, and hateful discourses. How do my current book is looking at how we turn mean memes into caring conversations. And it's not an easy thing. I think the other thing also is that, because internet memes, some people describe, especially for Generation Z, it's their main kind of language that they use on social media. It shows up at Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And so these memes become spaces where they again, they're learning about Judaism, Islam online, not because they live in a community that has a large population of Jews, or they visit a synagogue. And so these online experiences and these memes are becoming teaching tools. And we see some of the memes, you just do a Google search of kind of, Buddhism, well, especially Islam memes, Judaism memes, and the memes that come up are very mean. They're hostile, they're angry, what I'm also finding is that memes that 7 years ago that you'd have to go on maybe a closed alt-right or hate group to find online, now actually show up in the Google search because they've become so prolific and shared so often. And so this is really changing discourse about religion. And so that's what I'm concerned about and looking at in my current book.
Mm-hmm. And one of your papers about the memes was entitled Detecting Mixed Messages in Religious Memes. So I'm really interested in the theme, the topic of ambiguity online, of blurriness, and there are a lot of words that we are starting to use in order to describe the fact that something which means is employed in the online environment in a different way. So there is a kind of struggle in the semantics, in the pragmatics. That's why memes are getting more complex and more idiomatic and more specific, more mean also, more crazy, etc. So what did you mean by mixed messages regards religious memes? What can you tell us about this issue of the problem to actually understand what we are looking at when we are online?
Just like, the internet has a certain kind of language in which it uses to kind of communicate, like Facebook is all about building social communities and friendship kind of networks. So it works like, kind of certain kind of patterns and certain kinds of realities. So do memes. So memes, like how people select different images, how people use the text, how those are put together. And there's, even wikis out there that's, such as knowyourmeme.com, which is kind of the dictionary / encyclopedia of all things memetic. And so these memes often are stock characters. So, we can see there, could be condescending Wonka, which is Gene Wilder from a movie, and he's always saying, "Oh, really?" Saying condescending things, or Success Kid, this little kid in a blue background that's going like, "Yes." So we know these memes, they show up all the time, but they have a certain kind of pattern in what they communicate. And so people, when you see a Wonka meme, it's probably going to be sarcastic. If you see a Success Kid, it's going to be more positive and like, "Yes, I've overcome." But the same thing is true with kind of religious memes. There's a whole kind of emerging sub-discourse about, we have advice God, religion, pit, time Jesus, buddy Christ. So a lot of these kind of things, again, have the same kind of pattern. But the challenge with memes is that, the same meme stock character, okay, it was designed this way. And normally when we see it, this is how we decode it. But meme generators, all you need is 60 seconds and the knowledge of meme culture. You can take a meme and create a meme that you spread online. And so most memes will follow a certain pattern, but not all memes do. So you get these conflicting images that, you learn, and I would study these things about, this is what it means. And then I realized, oh no, well, actually, that's a negative message. So we looked at kind of analyzing a lot of these stock character memes, both kind of mainstream and then religious oriented, to see, what were the kind of main, how do they frame religion? And so we found, there was frames of promoting religion and playing with religion. So these are very positive ways. Promoting is actually, I'll usually use my insiders to kind of say, hey, this is a positive idea, or our community should be seen in a positive way. And the playful is kind of maybe be what we call in the U.S. tongue-in-cheek, kind of like, kind of comparison, saying or showing contradictions. But again, they may even be kind of making fun of your own religion, but doing it in a way that saying we can take religion seriously, even if we're sarcastic about it. But other ways, there's other themes, and I would say that, like, if no one's done a quantitative study, but I would say a lot of memes, we see more of the negative framing. So religion, questioning religion. So, and that can go either positive or negative, but often has a more critical tone. Then we see religion as irrational. So kind of a lot of memes are kind of framing showing, well, see how contradictory or hypocritical, religion pigeon is a character that does this a lot, showing that, like, well, this is a nonsense view. And so religion should be disrespected because, it just has these crazy beliefs and crazy practices. And then we also see even like religion is mocking. So really kind of critical, and that's what a lot of the hate speech means you see that are, basically belittling religion. And so, it's a mixed message because we have both positive and negative discourses going on. And just by looking at a meme, you can't really always tell immediately, because meaning is in the eye of the beholder in digital culture. And what I might find funny, you might find offensive.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think that it works in this way in general, but with the online communication, it's really pertinent, the metaphor of a given message as a message in a bottle, because we don't know the author, we don't know the original context, we don't know the original intentions. There are messages that can be ambiguous in themselves because they reference to a particular context or episode or moment, or which is more the most important thing, to a specific public audience community. So something which is appealing to some internet users, appalling to other ones. And I think it's really interesting to see how the way in which online communication works can affect communication in general works. Mm-hmm. Going towards the conclusion, because I don't want to steal more time. The last two questions. What you are actually working right now in this moment, your research?
So as I kind of just mentioned, I'm writing this book, when internet memes are mean. And so I'm basically kind of taking these about 7 studies that I've done either by myself or with students, and trying to write up a book that looks at kind of how do we understand the language of memes? What does that do? And what are the kind of common trends of how religion gets talked about, framed in these discourses, and then looking at the 5 major world religions and saying, okay, if we were going to just give a broad brushstroke, this is not exhaustive, but what seem to be the main kind of stereotypes that are communicated about these religions, and what does this tell about how memes frame religion and how popular culture then would read memes, and what do we do about that? One of the key arguments of the book is I see memes as religious microaggressions. And microaggression is the idea that it's an unintentional or a blind kind of offense against a minority group, oftentimes racial, but I would argue religious as well. And so these memes sometimes they're not intentional to be cruel or the intention to be offensive but they are. And so how do we kind of unpack those microaggressions? How do we turn those into teachable moments? And how do we actually maybe reinvent religious discourse through memes in a way that might encourage religious tolerance, diversity, and broader understandings about religion, and not just encourage hostility? So that's the kind of project I'm running on. I got 5 of 8 chapters done. So depending on how long this pandemic lasts, I might finish the book sooner than I thought.
Okay, so it's going to be the next big one that you're going to publish. Okay. Yes. I'm going to take it when it's out. I'm really interested in in memes and also in the relationship between memes and a specific content, so for example religion, etc. Last question, which is really in point and the context in set right now. Do you think that this, as they say, but it's not technically correct, this global quarantine that we are experiencing will boost, will reinforce, will enhance, etc., digital religion practices? For example, everybody saw the live streaming of Pope Francis giving the plenary indulgence in Rome, and it was really cinematographic and symbolically overwhelming for anybody. So either as a religious person or not, it was really intense, all the imagery that we saw during the live stream. So do you think that, besides this very specific example, but that in general, the fact that we are linked up more or less globally will boost the fact that people will practice some parts of rituals and their capability of express their faith on the internet, online?
Yeah, I think, in fact, I have a little kind of side project where I've been looking at kind of, in the last 3 weeks, especially in in Europe and the US context, a lot of churches and both Catholic and Protestant have done this rush of like, we didn't want to go online. We've kind of resisted it or ignored kind of digital culture, except for having maybe a website. But we've all been forced to go online, and there's a lot of different strategies. Some of you can watch these basically where it's a priest at the front of an empty church, and he's always got a phone back here, and he's trying to basically just put the original mass into a digital context. Other spaces where people are turning churches into like talk shows or kind of like a late night talk show format, and kind of saying, well, maybe we need to change church for the digital age. So I think one thing you're going to see in the next 6 months, some really interesting experiments, both some failures and some successes, and then it's going to lead to afterwards when people kind of realize, hey, do I have to go online if my church now decides to have this or offline? So there's going to be a debate, I think, about people's religious practice as well as what role these churches and institutions feel about religion. And I think the second thing is that, a lot of people, you and Italy have been really, under quarantine for a lot longer than we have. And so, I know a lot of people are experimenting with how do we use Zoom to maybe have a coffee hour or cocktail hour with my friends. How, is this media really used for community building and relationship building? And so I think there's going to be a lot of interesting experiments that come out that may not be religious, that may be kind of more secular, just social. And that's going to change people's expectations about what they want, i.e., they'll be ready to go, okay, we're just going to redo the virtual coffee/cocktail hour again. But it's going to teach people that, hey, while we can communicate this way, how might that change our offline experiences, or what's important to us? So I think you're going to be seeing kind of religious and secular experimentation. It's interesting dialogue and discourses in the next year or two.
Heidi, thanks a lot. Thanks for your time, for your answers.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.